Hello, everybody. This is Christine from Thoughtful English LLC, where we provide classes, conversation, and caring to the English language learner. Welcome to today's class. Today we're going to learn about when to pronounce the ed suffix or ending as a separate syllable in English verbs that are in the past tense. Now, many of my students already know that if a verb is not irregular, that in order to change an action word in English to talk about the past, that they have to add ed to the ending of the word. However, some of those students feel like they must pronounce the ed as a separate syllable or sound every time it appears at the end of a verb in English. But that's just not the case. So, how do I know when to pronounce the ed as another separate syllable when using the past form of a verb? The answer, my friends, is actually simple, and we are about to make it much easier to remember. There are only two reasons you would ever have to pronounce the ed ending as a separate syllable. Now, you may find that surprising, but I'm happy to let you know that that is the truth. Now let's take a look at reason number one. If the base verb ends in a D. For example, the verb need changes to needed in the past. So as we can see, if our verb is need, the final letter of that verb in the present is a D. So we simply add our ed ending and say needed. That's it. We're already finished with reason number one. So let's move on to reason number two. Reason number two is if the base verb ends in a T. For example, the verb want changes to wanted in the past. So as we see, want ends in a T, and we simply add our ending and pronounce it wanted. That's it. We have our two reasons. There are many verbs in English that end in a D in the present tense. Some common ones are listed here: add, demand, fold, and record. These become added, demanded, folded, and recorded. You could simply do a web search to get a much longer list if you wanted to practice this concept on your own. We can also look at some common verbs with a T ending, such as lift, wait, part, and craft. And these become lifted, weighted, parted, and crafted. Once again, you could do a web search to get much longer lists of verbs that end in a T in the present tense. But make sure that when you do your search, you add the criteria that you're looking for verbs that are regular in the past, and then you will get a list of all the verbs that actually form the past by adding ed without requiring other changes of spelling. Now, I did promise you that we would find an easy way to remember this concept. The easiest way to remember the rule is to hook the idea to a fun sentence or two that you will easily remember. So in this case, we can play with the idea of the ed ending and the way it is pronounced as a second syllable. So remember that when we pronounce the ed ending as a separate syllable, it sounds like ed. And Ed is actually a very common name for a man or a boy in the English language. So we're going to pretend that the name of this little black dog is Ed. And maybe when we saw Ed the first time, we thought that he looked like he wanted to play. So we now have the word want that ends in a T with its ed past tense ending and sound. Ed wanted to play. So we've used a verb that ends in T in our fun sentence, and now we're going to add a verb that ends in a D with another fun sentence that completes the two rules. So here we go. Maybe when we looked at Ed, we felt sorry for him because he wanted to play, but needed a toy. Now we have the word need that ends in a D with its ed ending and sound. Ed needed a toy. So you could imagine that we could go on and on with this little story. We could say something like, my dog Ed wanted to play and he needed a toy, so I gifted him with a ball. So the idea here is to use your imagination and make up some sentences that are meaningful for you and easy to remember. You can use want, need, or any of the other verbs that I presented you with in the earlier slides. And as I said to you before, you can simply do a Google search to come up with a much longer list of verbs that you can play around with and have fun with. I hope that you enjoyed this video and found it to be useful. Please like and subscribe at the end, and contact us at Thoughtful English if you have an interest in personalized lessons via Zoom.